And we had, so we had a couple things that we wanted to do. So if we can just, just send in the link for everyone.
A lot of people.
So we are actually going to be doing, first we're going to review the ayat that we did last time, which is from ayat 269 from Surah Al-Baqarah. We are definitely close to ending, but there's so much to say really. So we are hoping, inshallah, that we would be able to at least get far. And of course, with every single day that passes, we're approaching the end of Surah Al-Baqarah. And the reason why the last portions actually took longer than before is because those are the ayat that actually have ahkam in them. In other words, they have rulings in them. And the ayat that have rulings in them, we would have to put in a number of different scenarios in order to bring about a clear interpretation for the ayat, because if you don't understand all the scenarios, then you're going to be confusing the ayat, and you're going to be putting a lot of things based on that ayat. You're going to be putting it out of context in life. So I have to make sure that you're understanding the ayat and not saying, okay, well, this is what I understood, and then you're putting the ayat in the wrong context and thinking that that's what the ayat are actually saying. So that's the hard part about bringing in the interpretation. Of course, when it comes to ayat al-ahkam, I have to make sure that, those that are attending are getting at least, not necessarily all of the picture, but at least, understand if there is something that must be explained, that they're understanding that there are other ayat that continue. So in other words, that topic might not necessarily be completed.
Okay.
As much as I can, I try to, include all the different areas for that topic. So we did actually reach this ayah right there, 269, يؤتي الحكمة من يشاء وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And I did actually mention that scholars had different interpretations on what really is al-hikmah. So this ayah generally is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the wisdom to whomever he wills. But the question is, what really is wisdom? And we mentioned that scholars were at different interpretations on whether this al right here is an inclusive al. In other words, whether it's including any form of wisdom. In other words, it's actually talking about wisdom and not necessarily metaphorically referring to anything else that is, in other words, something else specific. So we're looking at, is it referring to the Quran? Is it referring to the wahi? Is it, when we say wahi, we're talking about anything that was sent with Jibreel alayhi salam. So whether we're talking about the Quran or whether we're talking about the Sunnah, in other words, the prophetic traditions. So is this actually referring to the Quran, or is this talking about something even more specific to anything that is involved in wahi? But I found actually interesting is that al-hikmah, and that was a Tahir ibn Ashur, in where he actually considered that hikmah is a lot more comprehensive than to actually limit it to the Quran and Sunnah. And he regarded that al-hikmah, or wisdom in general, can be any study or any understanding in where it involves, one, knowledge of something, two, in how it's related to the practical side of life, and then three, how it basically helps us get to the least wrong consequences. In other words, the least evil consequences. And that's what he regarded as hikmah. And he didn't necessarily say that it was only specifically only speaking of Quran and Sunnah. I found it really interesting. And it's really strange how he actually went farther in explaining the different types of hikmah, in other words, the wisdoms by long ponderance. In other words, this can actually include a lot of the different sciences that we could be learning. The different sciences, whether we're looking at medicine, or whether we're looking at architecture, whether we're looking at even philosophy, different philosophies, or science in general. So it's really interesting how he actually included a lot of this. In other words, at the end of the day, is that by learning those sciences, you're actually getting the least consequence. So let's say a person is studying medicine, that yes, they're studying medicine, but they're applying that knowledge in medicine, for example, that is based on, let's say, anatomy, studying human biology, et cetera. And then at the end of the day is that they're reducing another form of an evil consequence, probably illness. You see it? So they're reducing something else. And let's say somebody is studying, let's say, political science, that they're actually studying political science to actually reduce different types of evils, unless the person is studying to become, nothing but an evil person. That's a different story, right? So I tried as much as I can to, I guess, figure out how do I understand and lay out what wisdom really means in order to figure out what it means to be wise, what it means to live the wisdom, what it means to contain the most important sciences. Because when it's actually talking about وَمَن يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, that if you are granted the wisdom, that you're actually given magnificent or outstanding benefits. And I really couldn't put it within a boundary, but my old-fashioned DNA I am. I will just end up going there again and again and again. And when we're talking about hikmah, because the scholars were actually talking about that al-hikmah was involving Quran, Sunnah, etc. So I thought, well, the foundation of hikmah is actually going to be in the deen itself. So in other words, your vision actually starts from there. Because remember when we said, when we're talking about hikmah, we're actually involving a number of different things. We're talking about understanding. In other words, the person is not basing their speculation or their understanding of the different things based on their own speculation or based on their own whims, but they're actually basing it on knowledge. And when we speak of knowledge, there are two types of knowledge, all right? There's the type of knowledge where it is based on empirical knowledge, all right? There's the empirical experience where we do different studies based on lab, and we're doing lots of experiments, etc. And there's the science in where it is, or the ilm that is actually based on wahi coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. And this is really important to mention because the empirical part in where it involves a lot of experiments, all right, the experiments are definitely going to give me high chance of knowledge, but that is still within theory. I'm looking at it from the Islamic perspective here. Okay. But wahi is actually containing two different elements. There is al-wahi in where there are al-muhkamat. What are al-muhkamat? In where it is clear, there's no doubt about it. And in other words, the dalala, in other words, the wording itself is very obvious, very literal. You can't interpret it otherwise. And there are the other types that are called the mutashabihat. What are al-mutashabihat? So al-mutashabihat, in where the wording itself, yes, we do know that particular ayah, for example, is definitely authentic in terms of the revelation. but then it is mutashabiha in where the wording can be ambiguous. Like, just like, for example, so somebody might ask me, is exorcism real? For example, okay, is exorcism real? Is does the waiting period, does the waiting period end by the end of a cycle or by the start of a cycle? How do we actually count that? Does the word qur actually mean cycle, or does it mean to be clean from the cycle? So you see what I mean? And that actually is differences of opinions between scholars on the interpretation. So that's why you would see even the wahi, there are some words in some ayat there, you cannot interpret it in any other way but one way. There are other ayat that can actually have multiple interpretations because the language itself can carry multiple interpretations for that particular word. You see what I'm saying? So when we look at these sides, so when we say ilm, today I was asked a question, and it was on the forum, whether the woman loses her child custody by getting married to someone else. Okay, does she simply lose child custody because she got married to someone else? So here's the thing, is that majority of scholars did consider that once she remarries, that she loses the child custody. But is that necessarily what scholars would agree on? Well, the answer is no. Although many will give interpretations that the chances are, if she is going to be married to someone other than the biological father for the children, that the possibility of abuse is there, and that she might actually get busy taking care of her husband and forget about the children. So the thing is that that type of, let me call it narrative, that interpretation was actually the supporting narrative for those that regarded that the opinion that the woman, once she remarries, that she loses child custody. But is that necessarily the only opinion out there? So that's why when we're talking about that, and look at that ayah, and we're in Surah An-Nisa, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks about وَرَبَائِبُكُمُ اللَّاتِي فِي حُجُورِكُمْ, about the daughters, the women that basically got married to the man, and we're talking about the girls, in other words, the stepdaughters. All right, and the ayah was really clear that she can actually take her hijab off in front of her stepfather. Now, when you're looking at that ayah, for example, you could see like Ibn Hazm, who regarded that that's an evidence that the woman doesn't necessarily lose custody by remarrying, and that because of this ayah, for example, not only is that the only evidence, but they also had quoted some Sahaba that also said that she doesn't lose custody just because of remarrying. So this is just where you could see that mutashabih is also really important to keep.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
All right, so the reason why I'm actually talking about ilm is that I wanted to be inclusive of what the scholars were actually talking about when in terms of text and ilm and what they, I'm trying to bring in a comprehensive understanding in where we're understanding, okay, what does it mean to have knowledge? Because this word is very comprehensive. What does it mean to have knowledge? What does it really include? How much of studying are we talking about? And that's why I'm looking at right there in where, yes, even if you had the knowledge of the Quran, it's not enough to actually necessarily regard that your understanding of the situation. And this is really important in where your knowledge about the situation is extremely important. So right now, for example, if we want to talk about, let's say, marriage problems, it's not enough to know the rulings of Quran and Sunnah in relationship to let's say marriage, divorce, and its rulings and all these different things. But there's also a consideration in where the person also has some knowledge, even in regards to marriage counseling. That's really also important if the person is going to be dealing with situations in relationship to marriage, for example. So to train in other fields of ulum is actually part of ilm. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Okay.
In where when we talk about hikmah, it's not only in fiqh, but there are other areas of knowledge that should be included. And the more the person is actually aware of those different sides, the stronger their hikmah is. So let's say you want to talk about the ruling, for example, in regards to women's health. It's not enough to say, okay, well, I know the rulings related to, let's say, period and istihada and whatever have you. You also need to get some other information that if it relates to the situation, if we're talking about women's health, for example, you want to make sure that you also include the other empirical sciences that are known within our times to that particular situation. So it is very common, for example, in where I would get situations coming to my office, for example, and they would be complaining about a problem, which, you might think it's a problem. It's because she's got an attitude. And you may not recognize that it wasn't really an attitude problem, but there was actually an issue that related to probably hormonal problem or probably psychological problem, that there has to be hikmah and awareness about these situations. So we're talking about expansive knowledge in different areas, and it's not enough to know wahi to actually have the hikmah. Why? Because yes, you need the knowledge, and we've got the empirical knowledge, we've got the wahi knowledge, and we've got the situation and knowing about the situation right there. Sorry for the sloppy handwriting, but that's in order for you to reduce as much as you can to reduce from the consequences that might actually take you to the wrong ends. But you can't really have that unless you put in, yes, the deen on one side, to the knowledge about even health. When we're talking about life, a person's life is also including health. So the sciences of medicine and relating to personal health, etc., and then mental health as well, psychology and related to that, I am aware, and everybody knows my stances on psychology on various issues, but at the same time, it's really important to also have these sciences in order to understand how you relate with people's matters in where you are involving deen, you are involving personal health, you are involving mental health, and you are involving family and the dynamics of family and how they actually evolve around a number of different issues in order to reduce the different problems. And of course, you are aware of the different financial situations that can pertain to how we look at the bigger picture in a person, in the individual, and even the communities, individual and even communities situations. So when we look at hikmah, we're not just talking about personal here, but we're also talking about the impact it also has on the community as well. But what are we really looking at? Again, it's the deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, the man. We go back to that again. So when we're looking at hikmah, we're going back to that one again.
But they all have to serve wahi.
They all
Empirical knowledge has to.
absolutely, of course, they all have to serve wahi, because at the end of the day, when we're actually looking at all the matters, the whole thing. Remember the first ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah, قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة. We talked about that before, in where you cannot actually speak about wisdom. You can, exactly, you have to always keep in mind, you don't want to just serve hikmah. Hikmah is not just supposed to be serving a person's body health and a person's dunya benefit. The whole thing is all about getting to the akhirah. It's all about serving the purpose of life and getting to the akhirah. So if we don't have that within perspective, you've gotten things lost. That's the main hikmah.
I have to stay away from psychology until I could have a good base of Islam.
Oh, absolutely.
Because otherwise
Totally
I
agree.
slip.
We're going to come back, inshallah, after Salah. You guys want to pray here so we won't
Yes,
waste time,
let's pray
inshallah?
here.
All right, inshallah.
I'm not praying. Empirical knowledge on its own can go into speculation, right?
So not all, let's do it after Salah.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون ولا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم أولئك هم الفاسقون لا يستوي أصحاب النار وأصحاب الجنة أصحاب الجنة هم الفائزون لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل رأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلكم تتفكرون.
What do you want in yours? Cucumber and what?
الله أكبر.
You want some salad? Huh? Oh, okay. Let wait. You want some tomato?
سمع الله لمن حمده.
You want onion?
الله أكبر. الله
Mr. Sarah,
أكبر.
will you mute your mic, please?
الله أكبر.
Ruqya, what do you want in yours?
Sister Sarah, will you mute your mic, please?
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
I can go backwards. Look at this.
الله أكبر.
Look, I can do
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Should we continue, guys, just because we don't,
No time.
no time?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I saw your hand
Yes.
up and go
Before you
ahead.
move on,
Okay.
so can the ex-husband say to the wife, like ex-wife, oh, well, you get married again, I want my kids? About the,
So that's the whole debate, is that if he says that, if she does remarry, does she automatically lose her child custody, or does she actually keep the joint custody for her children? That's the whole debate between scholars. That's why I'm saying it's not just a debate between scholars, but it's even a debate between the Sahaba as well.
okay.
Okay, so I'm just saying that. Okay, so you will
Can
have.
we make sure, like you're saying, they decided the wife to keep it, but then wife married. remarried.
So if they make it a condition and she agrees to the condition, then she would have to agree to the condition that she had already put on herself. Well, that actually takes me to the other segment. Just give me some time, okay? وَمَا يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Now, in other words, when we're talking about hikmah, it's really important to understand that, yes, just like we were explaining that there's the ilm, and we said there's the empirical ilm, and there's the wahi, and we said even when it comes to wahi, you've got some wahi that is muhkam and some wahi that is mutashabih. And then we also talked about understanding the situation, and understanding the situation actually means that the person understands the different details of the situation. In other words, you are, if let's say you had a situation that needed probably medical expertise, you're going to have to involve the medical expertise on board. If let's say you needed probably financial experts, you would have to involve financial experts and actually talk to financial experts on board. And this is really important to keep in mind, because oftentimes people will, I would say, take their own knowledge in everything and consider themselves experts in everything. There's no such thing as experts in everything. And that's why even if the person had ilm al-sharia, they still have to say, please contact a marriage counselor, or please contact a medical doctor, or even have knowledge about the different fields that are out there. The different fields that are out there in terms of whatever topic that they're relating to. That this is really important. And that's the same thing, is that the understanding those resources is actually part of the hikmah. And
you need Islam to get to those.
well, you need Islam, and you also need taqwa. And this is where oftentimes, unfortunately, we would have people think that, okay, I can just go to the sheikh, for example, and he should give me the knowledge and everything. And I've said this many times where I've actually had people come to me and say, hey, I've got constipation. Can you tell me which medications to take? Or I'm actually having abdominal pain and such issues. Can you just give me ruqya? Believe it or not, you will have a lot of people, I've got a lot of people that will, yes, I do ruqya, but I get a lot of people thinking that their situation is just an issue of ruqya. If I were a liar, I'd be making millions from these people. Just abusing their ignorance. Millions from these people. Believe it or not, I've had a case where they came to me and they said, want you to do ruqya. And I said, sure, I'll do ruqya, but why don't you do it yourself? You could do it yourself. And this is really strange. I said, you've got a lot of people in your area doing ruqya. Why don't you ask, the people in your area? Here, I'll give you a YouTube video, and listen to that YouTube video, and it'll help you do the ruqya yourself. And the lady said, we're willing to pay you $6,000 for just one day of ruqya. I'm like, $6,000. $6,000. And guess what? So I said, why are you paying $6,000? Why don't you do your own ruqya? She said, well, we tried to make an appointment with this person, this sheikh person in Texas, but he actually, no, he is 4 months off for an appointment.
Yes, yes, I know that.
And it's $6,000 for a session.
I know that.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. That is more than what a neurologist would make. I swear to God, a brain surgeon would not be getting paid like that. 4 months. I mean, I've got a neurology appointment and it's only like 3 months off. And this is what? 4 months off, and it is $6,000 per session. You know how long the session is? This is just a waiting list. The session is just going to be like 5 hours. $6,000 for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Imagine. I'd really want to calculate. Can somebody do me the calculations? If this guy was taking 2 patients, quote unquote. All right. Per day, let's just say per day. Okay, so we're looking at $12,000. Let's just say he's taking his weekends off to be with family. All right.
He makes 30,000 a week.
That's
30,000 a
60,000
week?
for the week.
30, okay, let's just say these 4 months, he was just working working just these 4 months. What are we looking at?
200,000.
How much?
It's not
200,000. Wow, he'll be paying off his house like that with a snap.
And it's all cash, there's no taxes.
And it's all cash, no taxes. And by the way, he will tell you that you have to pay hotel expenses and flight expenses and all that. That's on a side.
Yes.
It's all profit for him.
It's all profit, plain profit. This guy's just reading Quran for you. Why don't you just read yourself?
That even halal to charge that much?
You know,
Seriously.
that's a good question. Here's the thing, is that there is a hadith, and this is where they base it off from. There is a hadith where Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, along with some Sahaba, this is I'm just laying it out for you like that. All right, there's a hadith where the Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, along with some Sahaba, so they basically were off on some kind of a mission. And then they stop at this village. And when they stop at this village, they were clearly hungry. So they ask for food, but the people actually refused to give them food, ironically. But then they came to them and actually asked them whether they had some kind of a ruqya. So ruqya is like a spiritual healing. And they said, yes, we do. So, but they had put a condition that if their chieftain who was sick, that if he gets healed, that they would have to pay them 30 heads of sheep. All right, 30 heads of sheep. So sure thing,
He gets cured.
the Sahabi, one of the Sahaba, they basically go read the Fatiha on them 7 times. And the Sahaba described him كَأَنَّمَا نَشِطَ مِنْ عِقَالٍ, that he just got up completely cured, as if he were a horse that was tied up and was just released from all the tying, just cured on the spot. So they took the 30 heads of sheep, but they weren't sure if that was halal. So they went to the Prophet ﷺ and said, hey, this is the story, this is what happened. We charged them for the ruqya and they gave us 30 heads of sheep. And that was really in response for not giving us food when we had asked for it. So the Prophet ﷺ told them, "Idribu li ma'akum bisahm." Give me a share. Give me a share. I was like, yeah, give me a share. They gave him a head of sheep.
So it's a halal.
So that's the thing, is that if the person, so in other words, it's a transaction. If the person is consenting to pay $6,000, I didn't rob it from you. Will I call it scam? I personally will. I personally will call it scam, because when you're abusing the person's ignorance about something and that they can actually do it on their own, I personally consider it scam.
And not much money.
Not much, exactly. I personally consider it scamming, and I personally consider it really people consenting to get scammed. And this is really often.
So I address it like that, but is it okay? Because I fight it like that, and this happens a lot in my community, of course. Like one person I know just called, and I know him. I said, "You're charging $500 to do live." I started going hard on him, But then I realized the sick people don't even listen. They just think solution comes from here. So I took a step back and I questioned, if a person is scamming people like that, what ruqya is it gonna give you? Then I realized everything is in Allah. Is it okay to question that even? Because I don't.
Well, let me say the
So
other
person does
side.
this stuff.
I made the ruqya for someone, and I actually made the ruqya for him over the phone, by the way. And it wasn't long till I personally got sick myself, and I ended up in the emergency room.
Wait.
This is real, you guys. This is real.
You teach us Quran and
This is real. I ended up in the emergency room where I didn't know what was going on, but I got the same exact symptoms that he was actually complaining from. And I was really sure that this person was inflicted with sihr. So I'll tell you from one side, the last thing I would really want to do is ruqya, but the first thing I would want to do is ruqya. I know what, can you say a sentence that makes sense, I agree with you, but it is not an easy thing to do. It's not that, I'm here, needing this big major science, but you're really putting literally, did he get cured? He didn't. I got cured because here's one thing, when you're talking about ruqya, all right, there are a number of different things. Before you start doing ruqya yourself, you have to do ruqya for yourself first. All right, but we're not talking about ruqya anywhere, yes, just reading Qul Huwallahu Ahad 3 times, Qul A'udhu Birabbil Falaq 3 times, Qul A'udhu Birabbin Nas 3 times, and blowing 3 times and wiping on your face. But no, you have to do more ruqya on yourself and the person that you're doing it for. Anywhere, for example, that morning, لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير 100 times that morning. And you also have to engage in halal. You have to engage in a lot of involvement to make sure that, listen, shaitan will get into you to those moments. We'll get into those moments. So at the end of the day is that, when you're talking about, it's like, okay, it's a type of scamming. I'll call it a type of scamming, but I'll tell you, does everybody, really want to do this? It's not that easy. It's not that easy really, because it can involve, putting a lot, my own sheikh, in fact, my own sheikh in Kulliyat al-Sharia, he used to do ruqya. He actually stopped doing ruqya because of the harm that inflicted him and his family. It was too much for him to bear.
Who infects you? They have the jinn.
The jinn itself.
You can tell them go away.
Oh, really? Oh, great job. No one thought about that. Ooh, if only.
I don't know. It's somehow I know this book. Have criteria who is patient and who is the one of do ruqya, have to criteria. You have to do from both sides. Because of this ruqya, it's like who is fighting in the jihad who is safe. That is واقع. ولكن مع الجن it's fight.
So one thing about ruqya is that you have to do it not once. It's not one session. You have to keep on doing it every single day for yourself. Every single day for yourself. I'll just say a number of different ruqyas that are really important. So when we look at ruqya, okay, I'm just going to give you, for example, I know this was a little off topic, but I'm just going to show you guys just a little bit some of the things of what does a ruqya, and I'd be happy to share some of this with you guys. Okay, so when you actually look at this, for example, okay, when we do ruqya, there are a number of different things that we have to do. Number one is that you see these ayat that are highlighted in red. So those ayat that are highlighted in red are usually the ayat that if a person were inflicted with any problem, we would repeat and repeat, and you could see the person. If I were to say فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ a number of different times, you will see that they're right in front of you, either screaming or they're feeling burning, or you could probably even see their neck or their body or their feet or their legs actually, or even especially their left arms or left legs actually shaking. And you could see that it's shaking in a very rapid way where you could see it shaking in a very rapid way where a normal person is not going to be really able to shake it in that way. So those ayat, and especially the ones that are highlighted in red, you would see the person really showing, I would say, a reaction to these ayat. Now, I would get a bucket of water and read these ayat and even read on the person. On the side, I would have water that I would also have had read these ayat on them, and I would put it in a spray bottle. And then also like on a side olive oil, and read also on that olive oil with that, and then a whole huge bucket of water, also read these ayat on it. So what am I doing with these three different things? So I've got a bottle of water that I read on it, a bottle of water for the person to drink from that was read on it, and a spray bottle that was also read these ayat on, and a whole huge bucket of water. The water that the person is going to be drinking from is going to be the water that they got. I don't bring them water. I tell them to get their own water, because many times people will actually confuse and think that there's something that you might have put in it. I want them to know that this is your own water. This is something that you bought. And I'll tell them, okay, here's what we're going to do. Sometimes they will be able to read by themselves, and many times they're not capable of reading by themselves because they will be forgetting the words. So you will be saying, وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ, and they might not even remember what you just said.
Can you read on us?
Can I read on you? I can, but hold on. So we would have this water where we would read on it, and then they would drink from it. Many times, this is real, many times when they actually read on water, if they're capable of reading, if they're not, I'll be reading on it and blow in it 3 times. If the person is inflicted with sihr, they will actually vomit, or they will need to use the bathroom frequently, almost every 5 minutes. Or after reading the ruqya, they will have light brown stool. This is real. This is real. This is something I see many times. Or they might vomit blood. Okay. Yep. Or they might vomit something black. Light brown stool, and I mean light brown stool looking like very lighter than this, even like golden type of thing. All right. Now, after we would read all that ruqya, we would have to, as much as we can, encourage them to actually read the words themselves if they're capable of doing it, as much as they can, because a person doing ruqya on himself is a lot stronger than the ruqya that you would be doing on them. You are just going to be, the instructor. All right. So you're reading those ayat and repeating those ayat, and especially the ones that are highlighted in red. And of course, if they're going through pains, like probably back pain, in where they're, constantly screaming, oh, and you could see they're constantly screaming because of their back, or probably because of their leg, especially left leg, or probably right hand, left hand, or probably giving the different shaking. That's when you're going to use a spray bottle to spray on that area. Spray on that area that is actually getting these involuntary moves or the pain that they're getting, and sometimes even get olive oil that you had read on it. Now, after finishing the ruqya, the water, we're basically going to pour that water, the bucket of water, that's not going to be very hot. It's actually going to be cold, not ice cold, but room temperature. And then after that, we're going to pour it all over them. The first time that you pour it over them, they're going to be screaming loud.
And you just still stay there.
You're going to be, well, I'm not, you can, I usually give them, I would usually say, okay, here, wear this, and they would go and actually wear it. Okay. So I would give them something to wear. So I won't see them not dressed, of course. And I would say, hey, I want you to pour this over yourself. Okay. So if it is you and I where we don't have a problem, yes, it's going to feel cold, but it's not going to be where you're going to be screaming. What was that? Does he approve it? My husband is afraid of doing such a thing. He'll be like, you know what? Get me out of here. I found myself needing to do this and needing to learn how to do this because of the many cases that came to me. I've had cases where in the beginning I was like, what are you getting me into? But I've had people come and beg me to do it. And I couldn't just let them go. I said, okay. And then little by little, I found myself really into this because I had seen cases where they were cured and how happy and what a difference it made in their life. And that's it. It was just these ayat. There's, no secret messages. They're just ayat. They're highlighted in red. That's it. There's no secret messages. I'm not calling on to no kamula and kabubu or nothing. It's
Can you
just
share
ayat.
that? I read on my
I
phone.
can. I definitely can.
We don't
I
like
d-
sharing.
It's really simple, that's all there is to it. And even at the end, the different du'as that were actually done by the Prophet ﷺ himself, and that's what you're going to do. So
Is there a YouTube that just has that?
there is, there are actually a number of YouTube channels that actually have that. Wow, I can see people just, okay. So could the scammer possibly be working with jinns to stay in business? I love that question. That is actually a very possible thing, and this is actually very common, believe it or not, in where we would have people that call themselves raqis, but in reality, they are nothing but engaged in black magic. This is very common, and a lot of the cases, they are actually involved in black magic and not really raqis. And that's why I'm showing you the ayat in order for you to see, listen, this is what a ruqya looks like. A real ruqya. A ruqya from Quran and Sunnah is actually based on the ayat and is based on the ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ himself was doing. That's what a ruqya shar'iyya looks like. It does not involve taking a picture from you or taking any type of clothing from you or any of your fingernails or any of your hair and telling you, hey, I need you to give me some of these substances so I can give you something to wear to cure you. That is not a ruqya, that is black magic. Okay, there's a difference. Now, does going to Mecca resolve black magic? Not necessarily, no. Even the Prophet ﷺ was actually inflicted with black magic, as in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, in Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ actually suhira fi mushtan wa mushata wujuf fi tal'i nakhlatin dhakar. That the Prophet ﷺ himself was actually inflicted at one point with magic, with pieces from his hair and pollen from the palm tree. So we could say that the Prophet ﷺ himself, it was basically a guy from the tribe of Bani Zurayq who actually did the magic and threw it in a well, in an abandoned well in Bani Zurayq. So he did actually inflict the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ didn't know what was wrong. Really, he was feeling that he was fatigued. He was feeling that, he wasn't focused really well. It affected his body, not affected his wahy, not the wahy that was coming to him. It affected his body. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is human as human can be, all right, and affected his body and not the prophet side, okay, not the prophet side of him, all right. So those are just, some of the things that I just wanted to share, because I want you guys, instead of getting scammed by raqis, I just wanted you, hey, you can do these things and actually do your own ruqya, and you don't need anyone to actually scam you and tell you 6 months off or 5 months off and end up paying $6,000 and waiting for all that. You could do it on your own. You can get someone, from your own
Sister Aisha,
friends to actually read it, and then in the beginning they might actually be petrified if there is a real case, but at
But
the
if
end of,
nothing happens, I don't have jinn.
well, if nothing happens, yes, you are fine. The only cases, it's, they're not always there, okay? There is a difference between al-mas and sihr and ayn.
Okay.
Those are 3 different things.
Okay.
So ayn is different because ayn, you could see that the person, for example, is probably, losing hair, or the person is probably all of a sudden forgetful and all these, just things that are constant. So that you've got things that are happening in a certain way, and where it's not involving a number of different things. You see the difference?
Yes.
So when you're looking at, for example, the hair is constantly falling out, it's one thing. All right. Possession is different. Because possession, it actually involves that when you're doing ruqya, you will have something talking to you, something that is different. Yes, it's going to be in the person's voice, but it's going to be different in where usually there's cussing involved. There is a word where the person is actually speaking in languages that they may not have been able to speak into before, or give you information that this person is not necessarily aware of this information, or things like, for example, I've had a case where it's an African-American that was not even Muslim. And I was talking to her in Arabic and she was responsive. And I would say, raise your right hand in Arabic. And she was actually raising her right hand, even though I'll assure you, this girl's African-American and probably never heard a word of Arabic. She's not even Muslim. All right. And she's actually responding in the different moves based on what I was telling her in Arabic. And that is definitely, that's not sahad. All right. And the person would even respond if, for example, I would say, Inna Allah la yuslihu amal al-mufsidin. And the person, even though they may not know Arabic, and they will say, but I'm not going to stop. And you could see, well, how on earth did she understand, but I'm not going to stop? What is she responding to? She's actually responding to, Inna Allah la yuslihu amal al-mufsidin. And here she is, she's telling me, I'm not going to stop. I don't care what you say. And you could see that the person's actually talking to me. And I'll assure you that that person doesn't even understand Arabic. So how did she actually respond? What? In the beginning, you would get scared. In the beginning, you would get scared because it's something that you're not used to. But at the end of the day is that you just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond all. And that no matter who that person is, I shouldn't be scared of nobody.
Allah is greater.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond all. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith that وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْأُمَّةَ لَوْ اجْتَمَعَتْ عَلَىٰ أَن يَنْفَعُوكَ بِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَنْفَعُوكَ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ قَدْ كَتَبَهُ اللَّهُ لَكَ. And وَلَوْ اجْتَمَعُوا عَلَىٰ أَن يَضُرُّوكَ بِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَضُرُّوكَ إِلَّا بِشَيْءٍ قَدْ كَتَبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ. That's it. The Prophet ﷺ told you that even if everyone were to join to harm you in any matter, they would never harm you unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it for you. And if they were to join to benefit you in any matter, they would never join to benefit you in any matter unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed it for you. So at the end of the day is that, you would just know that you are right there doing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. So that's why when we're speaking about exorcism or possession, that's totally different, because in sihr, it's really different. Sihr is really different, even in the response. You won't hear, the person, for example, no, I don't want to, or, these kind of things, or even cussing whatsoever. You wouldn't hear the person actually swearing in bad words or saying things like that. But you will see that they might actually be, maybe feeling pain anywhere. You can see, for example, their body is moving in a different way, maybe choking, maybe they're screaming of pain, maybe they need to throw up, these kind of things. These are really often, they're wanting to probably constantly use the bathroom. Abdominal pain tends to be the most common, in where they will actually start having severe abdominal pain, and you would see that, or even feeling like they were going to choke and they can't even breathe, or even need to throw up and constantly throwing up blood, throwing up black stuff. This is very common. And usually when we're reading the ayat that relate to ayat al-sihr, for example, مَا جِئْتُمْ بِهِ السِّحْرُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ سَيُبْطِلُهُ, or ayat that relate to, for example, وَاتَّبَعُوا مَا تَتْلُو الشَّيَاطِينُ عَلَى مُلْكِ سُلَيْمَانَ, where you're reading these ayat and they're right there screaming, even though you're, in their normal situation, they would not have actually reacted to it. So that's when you could see those patterns All right. Do I necessarily have any evidence to prove from the Quran or the Sunnah that, okay, here are the symptoms of black magic, here are the symptoms of possession, and here are the symptoms of hasad? The answer is no. So where did we get this information from? Really, this is just mainly empirical. With time, you would see these cases and you could see, how they look different in terms of the way they really do.
Symptoms of hasad.
No, hasad is different because it's very localized. Hasad is different because it's very localized. So let's say, your car got damaged. Okay, I can't do sihr on your car. Okay, I can't do sihr on your car, but I can do hasad on your car. Your car was so beautiful. I saw your car, and every time you would get a car and your car just breaks down, your car and your tires, etc. Or for example, I saw you, look, all of a sudden your skin is getting all this rash. Hasad is different. It's very localized. It's very localized. It's specific. Okay. Sihr is different. It's not necessarily specific. The person usually gets sick in many different ways, and there are the dynamics in where it's affecting their deen, it's affecting their health, it's affecting their ability to process ideas. They'll start becoming forgetful. They'll start getting agitated easily. They might actually start even with their body, they're constantly needing to go to the hospital, and you're like, well, and they're doing all the tests, and the doctors are telling them you've got nothing wrong with you, etc. And the person's like, well, I did all my tests, but I know I can feel it right there. And that's when you would give them, for example, a Ruqya and actually see the result in where the light brown stool, the constant urination, the vomiting, blood, etc. That's totally different than what the clinicians would actually get. Totally different. How did we get here? Go ahead.
How do we protect ourselves?
How do you protect yourself? Well, the first thing is لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير 100 times that morning. Number 2 is that Ruqya, قل هو الله أحد 3 times, قل أعوذ برب الفلق 3 times, قل أعوذ برب الناس 3 times, blow 3 times. No spitting necessary, and then you actually wipe on your head. Also read these ayat yourself. Constantly read these ayat yourself, and do what is pious in general. So things like, for example, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubuthi wal khaba'ith. For example, when you go to the bathroom, doing as much sunan as you can to help you actually stay in that long sujood, connecting yourself with dhikr. All these different things are extremely important, because in the end is that inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan. Right? What is inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan? The end of the day is that the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can't control them. But can it happen? Can it happen that a person can still get inflicted? The Prophet was inflicted, even though he's definitely the highest from ibadillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? At the end of the day is that there is the sultan in the general, in where can they actually have the general inflict, let's call it the general harm, or can it be a specific harm? So at the end of the day, the general harm is that when you do the general adhkar, all right, that's to give you protection in general. But many times you may actually still need certain ruqya that you need to do, let's call it a higher dose of ruqya. Go ahead, my dear.
Yeah, the hasad عند عين
ده
حسد ولا عين الناس هم سواء.
Yeah.
حسد ولا عين الناس. يعني عين الناس العين يدخل من الحسد، يعني بالمعنى لا شيء، يعني ما قالوا ما باركوا له لو يعني.
Of course, العين is الحسد. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to make sure.
Yeah, no, العين is الحسد. العين, it is called al-hasad, and there are so many different names for al-hasad. It's the same thing. But I'm talking about sihr.
Yeah.
right? The difference between al-ayn, al-sihr, and
Yeah.
big difference. All right. So you know what? I'm gonna actually pause the recording and actually stop the